Alright, welcome back. So in this video, we're now going to talk about something I call subconscious analysis. We're going to talk about what I mean by that. And I think this is actually going to be the last video for this chapter. In the next chapter, in next video, we're going to start the next chapter, chapter 11, where we now finally start talking about how to actually charge your subconscious. We went over the basic technique in chapter 8, but we're going to talk about that technique in its more full form next chapter. So, for this chapter, we're going to now talk about something that kind of manifests itself in a sense, has kind of like we're going to kind of look at what you might consider to be geometric principles of the subconscious mind, or a certain type of geometric ideas. And I know that might sound very strange, right? Because the subconscious obviously is very abstract. It's not something that you can show in physical space. However, even with that, we can still analyze it in a way using our intelligence, right? So even though we can't physically measure it, we can think about it in a way that actually does very much mimic principles in geometry. And we're actually going to get much deeper into that in chapter 13. So, and if you're not familiar with geometry or you're not comfortable with ideas like that, this isn't like, you don't have to see it from that perspective. Again, you're not actually doing geometry, right? So you'll see. I don't think, if you're not used to that stuff, I don't think it'll be as difficult as maybe you might be thinking. And if you are used to that stuff, then you'll feel right at home with this. So this section of the book, or these principles, are principles that I just kind of refer to under the term subconscious analysis. So why do I use that term? Well, in mathematics, right? So this is what I learned when I was studying math all those years ago, is that math is actually broken up into many different branches, right? So there's one of those branches is called analysis, right? There's a study of statistics. There's a study of geometry. There's a study of, I think, number theory or number theory or abstract algebra. I don't know if number theory and abstract algebra together, they might be under the same branch. But yeah, there's basically different branches. Topology, I think, is another one. So they're different ways of studying math from different perspectives. Different enough perspectives that we feel the need to categorize them as being in different branches. It's just basically a way that we categorize them. There's no exact rule that makes them any different. All math theoretically is the same, right? It's just different ways of looking at the same phenomena. Now, analysis is a branch of mathematics that focuses on the concepts related to closeness or distance, right? So it looks at certain mathematical objects, right, and studies what happens, are mathematical objects or relationships, and studies what happens when things get very, very close or very far apart. Usually it's very close though, right? So calculus, right? It studies concepts of continuity, concepts of limits, right? And that has to do with basically a continuous path or a continuous line, and as one value gets very, 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 very close to another, what happens? Does it converge? There's a concept of convergence, right? In other words, if you take the limit as something approaches some value, is it part of the set that you're looking at, right? Does it converge? So same thing with derivatives. Derivatives look at the limit of a slope as the change approaches zero, right? Which gives you the equation for the tangent line to a point. So analysis basically just studies the concept of closeness and all types of things related to it. And so that's actually what we're going to look at here with the subconscious. So in order to have any kind of analysis, any type of ideas related to mathematical analysis, you have to define what closeness means. You have to have an idea of closeness. Now in school, you're probably first sort of run-in, right, with the idea of closeness is absolute value. So you look in one dimension and you take the difference between 2 points, and then you just take its absolute value because distance can't be negative, and then that's your distance, right? But then after that, in 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions, you're generally looking at some representation of I think of it as the triangle inequality. generally it's referred to as Pythagoras theorem, which is like basically x squared plus y squared is equal to z squared, or a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared, which is the hypotenuse of a triangle. The triangle inequality, though, for me, is basically the same principle, but my understanding of it is it's more or less just saying the shortest path between 2 points is a straight line, right? And so that's what that's generally what's our concept of distance, that we look at in high school and as kids. And then if you get in, I believe, I haven't studied this yet, but I was looking at some stuff related to general relativity, and I think they even have concepts of distance in non-Euclidean geometry, where the shortest points between two paths can't easily be demonstrated using an equation of a straight line, even though technically it still is. So it kind of goes further than what you first learn about in school, and there's different ways to look at it. But you always need to have a concept of distance and closeness. And the most basic term for defining these things in mathematics is called a metric space. So a metric space is really just a space, a geometrical space, a set of points where you can theoretically perform some type of geometrical, you could sort of, some space where you can establish some type of geometry on, right? Geometrical principles, and demonstrate them within this space. So it's meant to be some physical representation of space to a degree, right? And usually we look at Euclidean space, which is just space in 3 dimensions. And then on that space, you define something called a metric. A metric is just a rule you use to tell the distance between points that are in that space, right? Like I said, one of the metrics we normally use in 2 and 3 dimensions is Pythagoras theorem, or triangle equality, which is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. If it's 3 dimensions, it's usually just the radius squared. Usually, it's r, but it'll be x squared plus y squared plus z squared. So, you would generally use that. That's basically your metric in that Euclidean space. And if you can establish a metric in that space, then that space becomes a metric space. Now you can do geometry in that space, right? Or establish geometrical principles. So why am I going into all this when we're talking about the subconscious? Well, because we kind of can establish those same ideas in terms of similar ideas anyway, in terms of your subconscious mind. So I like to think of it like this. So going over this first point, it's useful to think of subconscious memory as containing a subject space, and each point in subject space is a subject, right? So basically, in the same way we might look at Euclidean space, right, and say in Euclidean space, each point in Euclidean space is a coordinate, right? Some location in space which is delineated by a coordinate, right? Coordinate values. X, y, x, comma, y, comma, z, right? Actually, this is for people who aren't really familiar with this stuff, right? You would do, it's hard to kind of put it. So if you were looking for a certain point in space, in 3 dimensions, that's kind of the best I could do it. Let's say you had some point here, right? You would denote it by x, y, z. If you had another point in space, actually, it's just for 1. You might notice by x1, y1, z1 for the second point, and so on and so forth. So x, y, z would denote some place in space, right? And in that space, every point, right, is actually a coordinate. So your subconscious memory is the same thing. It's like a container, right? And every point in that container is actually a subject. It's some point of focus that you had in the past, right? That's how it gets stored to memory. So it could be a person that you focused on that's somewhere in subject space in your subconscious memory. It could be something, right? Car, food, some random object, I don't know. But every single one that you're focused on, theoretically, at every single moment of your life, some subject is created in subject space automatically, because your subconscious memory automatically stores your experiences in it. Some subject is created in that space during that storage process, right? So every point in subject space is actually a subject that you have focused on at some point in the past. right? So now why is this important? What's the need to establish or think of subconscious memory in terms of subject space? Well, for this reason right here, so to go over the second point, subjects experience a quality of closeness, right? So that's what I was saying before. In order to study concepts related to closeness, you need some type of metric on a metric space. But subjects experience a quality of closeness, and closeness is determined by how similar subjects are from the perspective of the subconscious mind. So, let me see, does this next point related? Okay, no. So what do I mean by subjects experience a quality of closeness? Well, to understand that, we basically now have to look at the subconscious and the process of memory recall or accessing a subconscious memory in this more complete form. So far we've been actually looking at it in a way that's not quite so accurate. Because we've been basically thinking of subjects, like before I said that you access a subconscious memory, right, by focusing on the subject associated with it, right? Every subconscious memory is associated with some kind of subject, just as every intention, right, has a subject and a command component, right? So every subconscious memory has a subject which is linked to, and when you focus on a subject, you access the subconscious memory, you access the association, and then your subconscious state tries to revert back to the state it was in when the memory was being restored, or the association stored in the memory, the subconscious memory. So we've been basically saying it like, we've been sort of presuming or alluding to the idea that the subjects are unique, right? So in other words, if I focus on subject A, right, the subconscious memory, I'm not going to access the subconscious memory for B, right? So if you take, let's say I have two cars, right? I'm driving a BMW and a Benz, right? So if I drive, I have a whole bunch of memories and feelings about my BMW, and I have a whole bunch of memories and feelings about my Benz. Excuse me. Let's say my Benz gives me problems or annoys me, or I don't really like it that much, I want to change it, but I love my BMW. Now, if I focus on my BMW, I'm not going to suddenly get the feelings and my subconscious won't revert to the state it was in whenever I focus on the Benz or I'm driving the Benz, right? Which makes sense, right? So, because then if some subconscious memory was accessed by focusing on a different subject, then there's no reason for all of them to randomly just be accessed at random times, right? So there has to be a uniqueness quality to your subconscious memory that prevents randomness of access of memories. And we've said that the thing that determines the access of memory is the subject, but we've been assuming that it was very unique, right? So there's only one subject that can access a certain subconscious memory, and no other subject can access it, right? So only my if I have certain feelings about my BMW, and there's a subconscious memory for it, then I will only access the association in that memory when I focus on that BMW, no other BMW and no other type of car, right? That's kind of how we've been looking at it, but that actually isn't really true, right? And that's why I say this concept of closeness. So, and that's why I say the experience of quality of closeness, and that's determined by how similar subjects are to the subconscious mind. So, I'm just trying to think if I want to, certain idea I want to talk about at this point. Yeah, so let me go over this now. So there's a concept that I call subconscious perspective, right? So what is subconscious perspective? Well, subconscious perspective refers to the way things look to your subconscious mind, and it's different from the way things look to your conscious mind. I didn't exactly use this term in the book. I kind of put things more in this terminology to make things easier. But I basically say the same ideas in the book. I just don't explicitly use this term or define it in this way like a vocabulary word. And if you read the book and you read the information online, you know I make all types of vocabulary words. I've been doing that throughout the book. So subconscious perspective, like it says, it's the way things look to your subconscious, right? Things actually look differently to your subconscious than the conscious mind. A good example of that are subconscious forms, right? So we mentioned that in chapter 7, right? A form or an arrangement pattern, right, is very easy to see to the subconscious. The conscious mind has trouble analyzing it, understanding it, because it's not a really conscious-minded thing. For example, the structure of a joke. We can kind of say jokes have the structure of a punchline and setup, right? That refers to the arrangement pattern jokes generally have. But it's very difficult for us to talk about that same kind of structure for other types of things that entertain us, right? Or other subconscious forms, because a joke is just a subconscious form. For example, what is the arrangement pattern that, when you say a joke has a setup and punchline, you're talking about the arrangement pattern of the subconscious form related to humor or jokes. What is the arrangement pattern of R&B music, right? What is the arrangement pattern of songs we would consider to be party music? What's the arrangement pattern of an action-adventure movie? All of these things have an arrangement pattern. We'll talk a little bit more again about that in chapter 13. But the conscious mind has trouble analyzing it because that's not really the way the conscious mind processes information. But to the subconscious mind, that's completely its language, right? So when you see something, when you see a joke, even though your conscious mind has trouble processing what made it funny, what pattern it needed to have to approximate the subconscious form of humor, your subconscious mind very easily and instantly recognizes what's going on and responds to it instantaneously, right? So from subconscious perspective, it could very easily see subconscious forms. Like I said, that's actually the language it speaks, right? So why is that important here? Well, subjects to the subconscious mind actually have a quality where they look similar to each other, right? Where that can still happen on a conscious mind perspective, but there are times where it can happen from a subconscious perspective in a way that doesn't exist for the conscious mind. In other words, from the conscious mind's perspective, two things can look very distinctly different, but to the subconscious, they look very similar, right? And so the reason that's important is because when something looks very similar, when two different things or two subjects look very similar to the subconscious mind, there's actually something very interesting that happens, right? The subconscious will actually access a subconscious memory of the subject that looks similar to the thing you're looking at. So let's say, for example, and a good example, and you probably have experienced this, are girls, right? So for me, I like girls, so I'm just going to use this example. You can use whatever you like. But if you like a chick, right? So me, growing up, at some point, I don't know why, I just always liked girls who, or at some point, I just started liking girls who wear fitted caps, wear tight jeans, and wear Jordans, right? And they can wear whatever shirt. But every girl who kind of has that personality type that I've met, I've always liked. There's something about them, they always have the personality type that I like, right? I don't know why it is, I don't know where it comes from, how that determines that I'm going to like them. They just always have a personality and a way about them in a style that I just like. Every single girl I've met that wears Jordans and a fitted cap, right? And wears tight jeans, Jordans, and a fitted cap. So basically what am I saying? Well, let's say that there's a girl like that who, actually I meant to give that example for categories, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But no, let me actually back up a little bit, because I thought that's where I wanted to go with it. No, let's say there's a girl I like, let's say I'm my girlfriend, I like her, I like her a lot and I'm in love with her and whatever, and I'm walking down the street and I see some girl who reminds me of her, of my girlfriend, right? So what will I feel for this girl I'm seeing walking down the street who looks like her? Now, there's no subconscious memory for her because I've never seen her before. So a subconscious memory would be created when it's new, right? So the first time I'm having experience with this new event, right? There's no negative memory for it yet. But subconscious memory is being created in my subconscious memory system or container. Now, if you experience a situation like that and there's some girl who reminds you of a girl you like, do you have any feelings from her? Is it a completely new situation? You feel nothing for her, even though she reminds you of someone you have a lot of feelings for? In your experience, you might say no, right? So if she reminds you of a girl you like, for whatever reason, you're gonna feel like you like her too, right? Even though you don't know her, right? She could be totally different from the girl you do like, but you can't help yourself. You like her a little bit just because she reminds you of the girl you do like. So what does that tell us? And you can probably imagine that in many different situations, right? So if I eat a burger from Smash Burger is my favorite restaurant, right? My favorite type of burger. if I eat something at Smash Burger and then I eat another burger at I don't know, I'm trying to think of Shake Shack. Shake Shack is like the second best. So if I eat a burger from Shake Shack, right, and that's very similar to a burger from Smash Burger, is it a completely new experience? Is it like the first time I'm eating a burger again when I eat Shake Shack? That's probably not the best example because it actually includes the same thing, which is a burger. But I think you get what I'm trying to say, right? Things that remind you of something else, right? You'll generally have feelings for the new thing that you've never experienced for. You'll generally have some feelings for it just because it reminds you of something else. And those feelings will match the thing it reminds you of. So what does that tell us? That tells us that it is possible for me to focus on subject B and access the subconscious memory of subject A. So it's not the accessing a subconscious memory related to the subject is not a completely unique process, right? It actually does have some non-uniqueness to it. But that non-uniqueness occurs on a scale, or I should say, the degree to which you access the subconscious memory occurs on a scale, and that the degree to which you access it and how much, how you sort of navigate that scale is going to depend on the similarity of the subjects. So, for example, if I see some chick, right, who reminds me of my girlfriend, if she only reminds me a little bit of my girlfriend, then I'll have the same feelings I have for my girlfriend when I focus on her, only a little bit too. It won't be, like, for example, let's remember what I said about subconscious volatility. But let's say, let's just focus on the degree or the strength of the compulsions that I feel when I focus on my girlfriend. So let's see, the intensity of the emotions I feel might be like up to here, right? Meaning it's at full power. So whatever energy or positive memory is stored in my subconscious memory for my girlfriend, as soon as I focus all of my attention on my girlfriend, that memory gets accessed, and I feel all of the total strength of the association, or the total strength of the compulsion. Now, if I focus on the girl who reminds me of my girlfriend only a little tiny bit, then I'll still feel some of those feelings from the subconscious memory associated with my girlfriend will be accessed, and I'll still feel some of those feelings when I focus on this new girl. But it'll be like that. So it'll only be a little bit. Hopefully that shows up, that's easy to see on camera. But it'll only be a little bit of the feelings, right? Now, if there's a girl who reminds me a lot, who's just like my girlfriend, right? Even though she's a new girl I never met, when I focus on her, I would probably feel almost all the feelings. Not exactly the same, but almost the same degree of the intensity of the subconscious association will come in almost at full power. Almost as if it was like I focused on my girlfriend. So, in other words, the degree to which a subconscious memory is accessed, right, occurs on a scale. And again, the how you navigate that scale depends on how similar the subject is to the one that carries the charge. But another way of putting it is to say how close the subject is to the one that carries the charge. In other words, the closer subject B is to subject A from subconscious perspective, then the more you're going to access the subconscious memory associated with A. Excuse me, and this gives us a new kind of way of thinking about it, which goes to this point, and we're going to now talk about the concept of a major subject and a minor subject. So major subjects carry the charge, and minor subjects borrow the charge, which is just a simple way of saying, in the process that I just spoke about, so I have my girlfriend, right, who I have all these feelings about, all these experiences with, who I focus on and produce a lot of intentions to charge subconscious energy. So there's a lot of energy stored in the subconscious memory associated with her, right? A lot of positive memory. So her subconscious memory carries the charge. Now, when I focus on some girl who reminds me of her, that's the minor subject. I've never seen her before, don't know who she is. So that she doesn't carry the main charge, right? She borrows charge from the major subject, right? So the major subject is my girlfriend, and this new girl who I never met but reminds me of my girlfriend is the minor subject. When I focus on her, I still feel some degree of emotion, some feelings, just because she reminds me of my girlfriend. So she's borrowing the charge from this major subject, right? So And that basically, when we say something reminds us of something, there's actually two ways to mean that. So, of course, something can actually remind you of it because of maybe similar experiences. But from subconscious perspective, actually, I think maybe, I'm thinking about it now, I think maybe it's always this. But, there's no need to overanalyze it. We'll just say, like, for example, like my girlfriend, when she reminds me of, when this new girl reminds me of my girlfriend, then that means from subconscious perspective, the two subjects are very, very close. And when two things are very close, that feeling, your subconscious will have a feeling that we say on a conscious level reminds us of something, right? That's really what we're referring to. So now we're going to go over this last concept. We're going to now talk about the concept of a category. I think that, I'm trying to remember if there's anything else I want to say about this, but I think we kind of went over everything. So it's just important to note that subconscious memory access is not a completely unique process. It is possible to focus on subject A in access to subconscious memory for subject B, right? In the degree to which you access that memory, or the intensity at which you feel the association in that memory, occurs on a scale that's determined by how close the two subjects are. The closer they are, the higher the intensity of that of the feeling of the association that gets accessed, right? And so, whenever you focus on the actual subject, the major subject, subject A, you would always feel the intensity at highest power because subject A is exactly like subject A, right? So they're so close that they're exactly the same. And so you would feel it at full power on that scale of intensity. And you would see that basically when you watch movies, when you listen to songs, right? There will be some song that reminds you of another song, and you might feel these similar feelings to what you had for the last song, right? But now we're going to talk about this concept. We're now going to talk about the concept of a category, right? So, just to go over this point, when multiple subjects get very close to each other, eventually a new type of object in subject space forms called a category. So what am I basically saying with that? Well, let's say that I focus on multiple different main subjects, right? Because in this case, we looked at the case of one main subject that had a minor subject, right? But it is possible to have multiple main subjects, right? So let's say that I could give the example I talk about in the book. I think I might have talked about it in chapter 13 though. But let's stick to the chicks, right? So let's stick to girls. So let's say that let's say I'm at work, right? And I'm constantly talking to one type of girl. Let's call her Patricia, right? I'm constantly talking to Patricia. Patricia has a certain look, certain style, and I keep talking about her. So now she's a main subject. I develop a charge. I talk to another girl. She's another main subject. She carries a charge. Let's call her, I don't know, Donna. Just made up a random name, but let's call her Donna, right? And she carries a charge too. And now each, this is not her borrowing a charge, right? So these are major subjects. So I'm just talking to them over and over and over again. Now, eventually, from subconscious perspective, there's going to be some similarity to them, right? There's going to be something about these events. If I keep doing that, and something about these events look very similar to the subconscious mind, even if they don't to my conscious mind, if they look very similar to my subconscious mind, what ends up happening is that they start to get very close to each other in subject space, right? You can even say my subconscious will charge in a way that alters my perception to perceive them in a way that makes them very close, because that can happen too. So they get very close to each other. Now they're all main subjects, they're not minor subjects. But then if they get so close to each other, they're like all each other's minor subjects, right? And so what ends up happening is that eventually they get so close that they all stimulate each other's subconscious memory. So when I focus on Patricia or Donna or whoever, right, the subconscious memory for all the other girls gets accessed, right? And what does that mean? Eventually, when that type of closeness happens, right, Now all I have to do is focus on a type of girl, right? So if I focus on a type of, or you can even say a type of situation that is similar, that has the parameters that made all those major subjects close, then I access a subconscious memory. So now, and I'll give an example of this, but now there's no longer a unique subject that's carrying the charge. Now there's a new thing called a category that's that's carrying the charge. And a category doesn't have a unique subject. It gets access when you focus on a type of subject. And if you're into computer science and you have looked into sort of abstract data structures, then this is kind of going to make sense if you think about it in those terms. So let's give more of a better example of this, because I know the way I explained is probably very abstract, but you can think of it very simply, right? So let's say I want to make. I'm trying to think if I want to go through the route of creativity. Categories. There's an example I want to give, but I want to talk about that in chapter 13. Okay, so a good example would be what I used to do when I was younger, right? So this was when I was like my early 20s. I just went, like I said, that's actually that's the first time I started to learn about some of these principles, because I was always theorizing. I did that when I was a kid. I could do it all day, every day, never got tired of it. So I was always theorizing about stuff when I was younger. And when I got older, as in my 20s, I wasn't good at talking to girls, right? So I was like, you know what? I'm going to use my theory-making skills to learn how to talk to girls. And I started doing that. And then that's when I started discovering these subconscious principles, because, of course, they were going to show up, right, the moment I started doing that. And so I started learning how to talk to girls, and I would just start talking to girls in like different situations, different chicks, usually at my job when they would come by. And so here's what actually happened. So in each different circumstance that I talk to a girl, right, I'm producing some intention. So I'm focusing on the chick, and I'm producing some intention related to entertaining her or whatever, or emotionally stimulating her. And as I keep producing that intention over and over and over again, there's a similarity in each circumstance. There's similarity in my intention, right? So I don't do that when I talk to certain types of girls. Let's say they're too old or too young, or they're just not they're like a customer at the place location. So it's not a good idea to talk to them. I don't feel it's a good idea to talk to them depending on the circumstance. So let's say, and I definitely don't do that with guys, right? So there's a similarity in each situation. And as I keep producing that intention, my subconscious charges. So not only does it organize, which we're going to talk about that later. Basically, that just means it charges my creativity, because my intention is to creatively talk to the girl in the way that stimulates her. But it also alters my perception, because I keep focusing on these similar events. My perception becomes altered to perceive these types of events, right? So that similarity principle shows up in my intention. My subconscious charges over and keeps charging in a way that reflects perceiving that conditions that have the things that make these situations similar, which is the fact that there are girls. These are young girls that I want to talk to. As I keep talking to each one of these girls, and my subconscious charges, each one of them has a little bit of main charge, but as I keep doing it over and over and over, they then keep reminding me of each other. Now, even a new girl I focus on reminds me of all of these old girls, right? Of all the previous girls I was talking about. And eventually, my subconscious becomes altered to the degree, and there's so much energy in all these subconscious memories that are all accessing each other, that eventually I no longer need to focus on a unique subject. So they're not reminding me of some girl. They're just reminding me of a type of girl and a type of situation. And then my subconscious actually starts responding the exact same way. So, I can keep talking to new girl after new girl after new girl, and my subconscious will actually charge, right, in each new situation, even though it's not a unique subject, right? And so it's not borrowing a charge in this case. Now it carries the charge, right? So all my subconscious will keep charging. Let's say I want to get better at talking to chicks. That'll actually happen if I keep talking to girl after girl after girl. So we're seeing something different from what we were talking about before, where it charged based on focusing on a single subject. In this case, the thing that carries the charge is the category, right, which is the type of subject. So categories are very important, right? And, oh yeah, I should have really went over this point. So categories carry a charge and represent a type of subject that is not unique, right? It's not a unique subject, which is what I said. So, and that's kind of what I said earlier about the girls who, for whatever reason, I've always liked girls that wear fitted cap, Jordans, and tight jeans. So that type of girl will represent the category. So whenever I see a girl like that, my subconscious responds in a specific way. That type of girl wouldn't remind me of a single girl that I looked at in the past, right? It's just that type of girl. So she's a category, right? And my subconscious responds to that category, right? So categories are very important for when we talk about charging the subconscious for performance, right? So let's say I want to be a conversationalist, right? I don't want it to be the case that I'm only good at conversation when I focus on a single person, right? I want it to be the case that I'm good at conversation in many different people and in many different types of conversations, right? Because you could talk about different things, you can have conversation in different environments, things like that. I want to be good in all of those situations. So what I want to carry the charge for my performance in that case is a category, not a subject, right? And people don't think about this stuff in subconscious terms, but I see this all the time. There are times, yes, when a person is very good at performance or creativity, but it's only to a unique subject. So they're very good at maybe talking to one type of girl, but they won't be good at, one specific girl, but they won't be good at talking to other girls, right? Or they're good at performing in some specific way, let's even say he's playing a video game against this particular person, but then that same charge doesn't carry when you're looking at other people. So that actually does apply to creativity in terms of your performance as well. A lot of people don't think on that level because they don't think in these terms, but I see that happen, right? And it's happened to me. So I have to go out of my way when I'm charging for performance to establish a category, right? Then my charge will carry to new situations and new people. So categories are very important for performance charging, and we're going to talk about that in chapter 13. We're going to talk about how to do that. Also, some charges only make sense in terms of a single subject, in terms of emotion, charging emotion. And then some charges might make more sense in terms of a category. So like the love emotion, right? You don't want it to be that you feel all this romantic feeling of love every time you see a certain type of girl. That doesn't make sense, right? So you want it to be with a single girl. So that type of charge wouldn't really make sense as a category, right? But let's say you want to charge the emotion of fun, right? So you want to feel like you're having fun with people. You don't want to have the charge that you only feel fun with certain people, right? Well, I guess you could do that, right? But if you just have like a fun personality type and you want to be able to have those feelings when you focus on new people, then emotion like that might make more sense as a category. Technically, that one could go both ways, but it might make more sense as a category in some situations. So some frequencies make more sense as a single subject, and some frequencies make more sense to charge as a category, right? But like I said, transcendental performance charging, that one is usually going to make more sense as a category, right? It's going to be very hard to charge your subconscious for performance, focusing on single subjects or creativity. Creativity is almost always used as a form of performance. So, but yeah, that's pretty much it. I think we covered everything. Yeah, this is pretty much it. Like I said, this is the last video of the chapter. In the next video, we're now going to start going over how to charge the subconscious, right? So you're going to see, so I know it's been a lot to study and a lot to learn, but now that we've kind of went over all of the theory part, just learning about the subconscious mind, now you're going to now see pretty much everything we learned applied to actually charging the subconscious. So, and it should be pretty easy to do if you've understood all these concepts. So yeah, that's it for now, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.